Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Diving Deeper from Longfleet Baptist Church. My name's Ken, I'm the minister here, and I'm joined by the lovely Nicky, my wife.
Hiya.
And we're continuing our series in which I call Prophets and Prophecies. And today we're looking at the Book of Ezekiel. And when I said we're doing that, Nicky went, "Oh, I want to do the video on Ezekiel. I love the Book of Ezekiel." So on Sunday we kind of did a rapid journey through the whole book of Ezekiel. And we know from history that Ezekiel was a priest in the Temple of Jerusalem around 597 BC. And he was one of the first people to be exiled to Babylon when the Babylonians invaded. So Babylonians had been raiding Jerusalem for 10 years or so. And then finally they decided they were going to take the elite Jews back to Babylon. And Ezekiel, being one of the senior priests, he was taken. And we know from the book that he was very highly respected amongst the captives there. They would come to him for advice and guidance. And so he was probably a fairly senior member of the Jewish community in exile in Babylon. As we read the book of Ezekiel, we learn that the people that were left in Jerusalem very quickly abandoned Yahweh and started worshipping foreign gods. And so we see that in Ezekiel chapter 8. Ezekiel is given this vision of what's going on back in the temple, back in Jerusalem. So first question, why did the people who were left in Jerusalem abandon Yahweh and start worshipping foreign gods in the temple?
Need to start. So I think there was a historical pattern of slipping away, coming back, slipping away, coming back. And I guess when times are good, you don't often think about this unseen God. That where is he? What's his present? There are no idols. There's no imagery. So it's probably easy to have an absence of something to focus on, which leads to other things that have these visuals coming in. And I know frequently back in Judges and onwards, you see that there's instructions to destroy other nations, which we can't really get our head around in our society. But I wonder whether there was any of that was part of protecting Israel from those influences.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind that they had probably only known fighting and bloodshed, that it might have not been quite so unusual for them at the time. We don't really understand it, and we have to accept that we don't understand it. But I do wonder if God kind of knew that trajectory was likely, unless that Israel was kind of protected and sheltered in a way. So by disobeying and actively disobeying, it led to this constant pattern, and so we end up with these different gods and these different mixes of different religions at the time.
Yeah. We've said before in some of our previous studies that at this sort of point of history and right up into the time of Jesus, culture is saturated by religion. There's no such thing as atheism. Everybody believes in some sort of supernatural power, in a god of some sort. And if you are a Jew, 500 BC, and the temple is the very center of your existence, not just your sort of cultural existence, but everything is about the temple. Your very culture is defined by your religion in Yahweh. And then this invading nation comes, drags off all your leaders, all your priests, all your prophets, all your politicians, all your legal people. And you kind of think, well, I've been abandoned by Yahweh. You would perhaps turn to another God. In our country, people, if they feel God has failed them, they would turn away from God and turn to atheism. But that's not really an option 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago. You turn to another God. And in Ezekiel 8, he sees the women mourning for the god Tammuz. And we know that Tammuz was a Mesopotamian god of agriculture and shepherds. And when autumn came and winter came, they would mourn Tammuz because they viewed him as dying over winter. And then in spring, they would celebrate him coming back to life again. So what Ezekiel is watching is the women in this ritualistic mourning of Tammuz at winter time. But as you said, it is a pattern the Jews in the Old Testament, they fall away from God. They start worshipping other gods. Something terrible happens. They beg God for forgiveness. He forgives them, draws them back in, and then they go back into that pattern, and it happens over and over again. I was reminded of the story when Moses went up the mountain, and just a few days later, the Jews all cry out to Aaron to build them an idol. I think it's really interesting what you said, that there are no images of Yahweh. You shall have no images. You shall make for yourself no idols. So although the temple is a focal point, there's no images of Yahweh. And if you haven't got a priesthood keeping you in line, you're not going to do your sacrifices, you're not going to do your worship in the temple, then it must have been tempting to have gods where there were idols, to worship an idol of another god.
You imagine, like, there's no cars, there's no transport. It's not just a quick trip to the temple, it's days to actually go and worship. And so the ones on more of the outskirts, perhaps, the different tribes that represented Israel at the time, you could kind of, if you think that it's not just happening over like a week, it's happening over many decades, when external influences shift things, when people aren't sort of making that trip, because it was only the temple. It weren't allowed to build anything else anywhere. The focus was on Jerusalem and the temple. So, it's over a long period of time that you see these shifts and patterns.
Well, interestingly, someone at the Bible study on Wednesday said there is a different interpretation of Ezekiel 8. He's not been taken and seeing what is happening at the temple there and then. He's seeing the journey of Israel into idol worship condensed into that sort of week. Into that day. So he's what he's seeing isn't real time. He's seeing, God is showing him the stages of Israel's descent into idolatry, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, maybe Ezekiel could be thought of as a time lapse kind of video of Israel. And there are certainly some parts of Ezekiel which capture the whole history in a very vivid kind of description, as well as the quite detailed description of the temple towards the end. So it's a fascinating book.
So in Ezekiel 24, Ezekiel is told that his wife is going to die, and he's not allowed to mourn her death in any way. So he tells the people his wife's going to die, and then he doesn't mourn her death. And God interprets that as the destruction of the temple. God says, I am going to desecrate my sanctuary, and you're not allowed to mourn it. So what do you make of the death of Ezekiel's wife as representing the destruction of the temple? And why didn't Yahweh allow the exiles to mourn its destruction? Why weren't they allowed to mourn? It would be very difficult if God said to me, right, you're a minister, you're a prophet, Ken, I'm going to kill your wife, and that's going to be an example to your church of how badly they're behaving. Well, so yes, there's this amazing vision that Ezekiel sees, the presence of the Lord leaving the temple. And I think that, they're not allowed to mourn, because Yahweh's saying, when you brought this up on yourself, if you're the leaders, you're the elite of Israel, you have brought this upon yourself. You're the ones that have disobeyed my rules and regulations. You haven't followed your faith. You've broken the moral laws, the cultural laws that I've set before you.
There's a finality
and
about
now
it.
The Babylonians are going to destroy your temple, and I have removed my presence before that happens. It's really strong words. It says I'm going to desecrate my sanctuary, and so why would you mourn that? And other people on the Bible study said also, it's the temple isn't God. It represents God in that community. And so if the building has become your God, your idol, God doesn't want you mourning a building, 4 walls and a roof. He wants you mourning that he's left, that he's departed. Well, you can't look at the Book of Ezekiel without looking at the Valley of the Dry Bones prophecy in Ezekiel 37, and I very, very clearly remember hearing an assembly about this when I was about 7 or 8 years old. It's one of the first assemblies, probably the only assembly I can remember from my childhood. And what the person speaking was talking about, they were using this as how doesn't matter where you are in your life, doesn't matter how down you are, doesn't matter what's happened, doesn't matter how dry you feel as an individual. You may feel like a pile of dry bones. God can always breathe his spirit of life back into you. He can put flesh and sinew on you and breathe the spirit of life into you. But I don't think that's how the people at Ezekiel's time would have interpreted that when he spoke this prophecy to them, when he retold the story to his community in captivity. So how do you interpret this Valley of Dry Bones prophecy, and what do you think the people of the time thought of it?
I mean, it's just such an amazing part of Ezekiel's prophetic life, and it's just so beautifully written and conveyed that, do you think these bones can live again? And Ezekiel's like, only you know, which is an amazing answer if you think about
absolutely.
it. Like, wouldn't you say, well, that's really impossible, isn't it? That's not going to happen. And yet somehow this spirit comes in, and you see these bones coming together, and then muscle and sinew forming on them. This is my future people.
Yeah.
And I think it reflects what Jesus says. I can just make sons of Abraham from the rocks.
Yeah.
What is the big deal here? And I think that it's just so amazing that it doesn't necessarily mean a blood lineage through Abraham, Isaac, all the forefathers but it's open to everyone. And whether that is for they're taken into exile, and we're talking about a new type of Jewish faith that's going to spring up out of exile, or whether we're talking about the Christ and everyone's sins. I think it's such a multi-layered story.
Yeah, absolutely.
That you can read it afresh for a very individual. Circumstance. If you think like you say, you feel like dry bones, God, breathe your spirit upon me. That's a very beautiful text for an individual, as it is for an entire nation. And to be honest, it would be nice to think that the UK could be given some breath of life again and a spiritual revival. So it's for everybody. Yeah. And it's just something that maybe we shouldn't limit, because it's such a powerful text.
I think you're right that so many of these prophecies have multiple layers and multiple fulfillments, and the people at the time of Ezekiel would have seen the restoration of Jerusalem and the building of the Second Temple under the Persians as the fulfillment of this prophecy. However, within a couple of hundred years, the Seleucid Empire had arrived, the Roman Empire had arrived, the Ottoman Empire arrived, the British Empire arrived. So it can't, the full fulfillment of that prophecy can't be the re-establishment of Jerusalem after the Babylonian captivity. And I think you're right that it is a prophecy for the future Israel, the idealized Israel, which I see as the Christian church. And that I know some people disagree with that, but I think that, as you've said, your blood lineage, it counts for nothing. And the New Testament makes that absolutely clear. It's about faith. The people who have faith in Christ are Israel. The people who have faith in Yahweh are Israel. And I think everything in the Old Testament, all the prophecies point towards that. John's gospel begins with saying, you don't belong to God's family because you're born of human will or your descendancy. You're part of God's family because you have faith in Christ. You've received Christ.
That's the mark of Abraham anyway.
Yes.
So I mean, I think it's interesting if we overanalyze everything in accordance with whether Jews, Christians, whatever, and wherever people want to believe, that's fine. The problem is, if you're born in a certain place at a certain time and you're kind of stuck in a place, and that's kind of clearly where your ministry and whatever you choose to do in your life has to be until God calls you somewhere else. So I kind of think that you need to interpret everything with that as much as we can, because we have one chance at this. And we need to spread the word, and we need to live by faith, and kind of that's it. We need to believe in Jesus Christ and be baptized and you're full of the Spirit.
Yeah.
And if we can get most of that okay, we don't need to really worry about the rest of it. And so, the fact that, I could be just a dry pack of bones, but I'm living for Jesus, that means a huge amount to me. I don't need to overanalyze the rest of it, because each individual in each country around the world has that responsibility and that alone.
Yeah. And so this prophecy, like you said, it could be for the Christian church. It could be for the nation of Israel at this point in history.
When we get to heaven, we can ask him. But
it also could be for our individual church as well. Perhaps your church is going through a period of dryness.
Yeah.
Perhaps you feel, oh, we're just a pile of dry bones, just a few of us in this church. And actually, here's this promise that God will breathe life back into you. And I really like what you said about where Yahweh says to Ezekiel, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel says, well, only you can know. And it reminded me of some of the doubters in the New Testament. So when the angel announces the birth of John the Baptist to Zechariah, and he doesn't believe him, you get these people doubting. And Ezekiel's not, there's no doubt there. He goes, well, you're the one that knows. If you're saying it, then So fantastic prophecy there that we can all take to heart. And
Absolutely.
I do believe it prophesies an end Israel, a glorious Israel that includes Christians and Jews. And I certainly would understand the Christian church to be the fulfillment of the prophecies about Israel. That there is no Jew or Gentile, male or female, free or slave. Those things don't matter. And what matters is your faith in Christ. That's what makes you part of God's holy nation.
We're going to be accountable to at the end of this. So, trying to interpret too much, it's not going to necessarily help the world. So anyway, that's my personal view.
We could sit here and talk about Ezekiel for hours and hours. I could. I have a reason. You're most welcome to go onto our website and have a listen to the Ezekiel sermon.
Am I allowed to share why I like Ezekiel?
Why do you like Ezekiel?
Because a lot of people know that I absolutely love skating, and there are loads of references to my sport in Ezekiel.
Yeah, the sea of glass.
The Sea of Glass is so I do ice skating and a little bit of
all
roller
the wheels
skating.
Spinning around.
Right. So for me, it's a very spiritual book and something that just I kind of see in that interpretation.
Yeah.
So there you go.
So I hope that as you read the book of Ezekiel, as you explore what he says, you understand the situation that he was in captivity in a foreign land, but still able to have this hope in amongst all the stuff that God was telling him to say to his people, these terrible things. There's still this hope. There's still the chance that God will breathe life back into a valley of dry bones. And if you're feeling like a pile of dry bones, just be assured that the Spirit can and will and desires to put flesh and sinew and muscle and breath back into